Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful framework from the legendary investor Ray Dalio. He has this big idea that all the chaos we're seeing in the world, from economic shocks to global conflicts, it isn't actually random. We're going to break down the 5 historical forces he says are driving everything right now and shaping our future. I mean, it really feels overwhelming, doesn't it? It seems like every single day you turn on the news, there's some new crisis, whether it's with the economy, global tensions, or these deep, deep political divisions. It's so easy to feel like it's all just spiraling out of control. But what if it's not random at all? This is Dalio's whole point. He believes we're just living through these huge, predictable cycles that have happened again and again throughout history. And he's pinpointed 5 major forces that are all connected and driving pretty much everything. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll lay out Dalio's 5 big forces. Then we'll use that lens to look at the current debt crisis, the rising tensions between the US and China, and the changing role of gold. And finally, we'll see how this all seems to be following a playbook taken straight from the history books. All right, let's dive right into the core of this framework. What are these 5 global forces? So here they are. First, you've got the financial engine, the debt and money cycle. Second, internal conflict, which is often fired up by things like the wealth gap. Third, you've got international conflict, where new powers start to challenge the old ones. And then there are 2 huge wild cards. Acts of nature, think pandemics or climate change, and technology, which is just constantly and radically reshaping our world. And here's the powerful part of this idea. Dalio's claim is that basically any major event you see in the news, inflation, elections, even wars, can be understood as one of these 5 forces, or more likely a combination of them interacting with each other. It's a lens that helps make sense of all the complexity. Okay, so let's put this framework to the test. Let's see how it works in the real world. We'll start with force number 1, that debt and money cycle, and apply it to what Dalio calls a great debt imbalance that's happening as we speak. Dalio explains this with a really simple analogy. He says a country's finances are kind of like a household's budget. You have money coming in and money going out. But there is one gigantic difference. When a government runs out of money, it can literally print more. And that one fact changes everything. Let's make this real with some US numbers. This year, the government is on track to spend a truly staggering amount of money, around $7 trillion. But the money coming in from taxes, that's only about $5 trillion. Right there, you have a $2 trillion hole that has to be filled in just 1 year. So to cover that massive 40% shortfall, the government has to borrow money by selling huge amounts of bonds. And this creates a really dangerous feedback loop, where you need to take on new debt just to pay the interest on the old debt. Eventually, that starts to squeeze out the money for everything else, from roads to defense. And it gets even worse when force number 4, acts of nature, hits, like a pandemic, forcing trillions in spending that nobody planned for. Now, this kind of financial pressure doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It spills over. It fuels forces number 2 and 3. That's internal and international conflict. And you can see this playing out perfectly right now in the shifting trade relationship between the US and China. For decades, we had this smooth, well-oiled machine. China made stuff, America bought it, and then China took those profits and bought US government bonds, which, hey, helped fund America's deficit. It worked for everyone. But that whole loop has been shattered by rising geopolitical conflict. Now it's all about national security, not just cheap goods. And China's starting to wonder, hey, if things get bad, could our US bonds be frozen or just become worthless? The fallout from this breakdown is just huge. That old system led to a hollowing out of US manufacturing and the middle class, which now fuels all sorts of internal political fights. In response, you see politicians using tariffs to try and rebalance things, but that just ramps up the international tension. And meanwhile, the real battleground becomes force number 5, technology, with fights over things like AI and computer chips. You see, each force just feeds right into the next. Okay, so if the world's #1 safe haven asset, US government debt, is starting to look riskier, where does all that money go? That question leads us right to the big consequence, the global hunt for a neutral alternative, an asset like gold. To really get this, we need to understand a key concept, a storehold of wealth. It's just a fancy term for any asset you can stick your money into, knowing that when you pull it out later, it will still have its value. It holds its purchasing power. For as long as most of us have been alive, government bonds were the ultimate storehold of wealth. the safest thing you could own. But when you have a massive oversupply of that debt and its value is being chipped away by money printing, people and countries naturally start looking for an alternative that can't just be created out of thin air. And this is exactly where gold comes back into the conversation. Dalio puts it perfectly. He says gold is unique because it's an asset that isn't somebody else's liability. You don't have to depend on someone else's promise to pay you back. In a world with rising debt and where you can't trust your rivals, that quality becomes incredibly attractive. And listen, this isn't just some theory. It's actually happening right now. We're seeing central banks all over the world. I mean, the biggest players in the financial system, they are actively selling off government bonds and buying up physical gold to keep in their vaults. All of this, the debt, the conflict, the search for a new safe asset, it can all feel completely new, completely unprecedented. But maybe Dalio's most powerful insight is that we have seen this all before. We're just rerunning a very old historical playbook. For Dalio, this whole way of thinking clicked into place on one single night, back in August of 1971. He was just a young clerk on the exchange floor when President Nixon came on TV and announced that the U.S. was breaking the dollar's final link to gold. Dalio was sure the market would crash the next day. I mean, the promise backing the money had just been broken. But the stock market soared. It went way up. He couldn't understand it, so he went digging through the history books and discovered that the exact same playbook was run in 1933 under President Roosevelt. In both cases, when the government was forced to devalue the money itself, the value of real assets like stocks and gold went up when measured in that new, weaker money, which puts a pretty big question mark right on today, doesn't it? And this, right here, is the crucial point. We spend all of our time measuring the value of everything, our stocks, our houses, our salaries, in dollars. We completely forget to step back and question the value of the ruler we're using to measure everything. When the value of that ruler, the currency, changes, the price of everything else has to change with it. Dalio says that once you see these forces, it's like watching the same movie over and over again. The actors are different, the costumes change, but the plot is remarkably consistent. So if we accept that, if we're just in a scene that has played out many times before, the most important question we can possibly ask ourselves is, what does the next scene look like?